reading is from the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verses 23 to 25. If any arm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, ban for ban, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. The second reading is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 38 to 41. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone will sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles.
When I was in grade 3, I met a little girl who had become a lifelong friend. We were very, very different people. I was very shy, and she was very boisterous. But for some reason, she was fascinated by peculiar little me, and on and off through elementary and high school, she pursued with me a friendship for which I ultimately became very grateful, and that lasted through most of our lives. As with some long-standing friendships, there was always love, but occasionally the liking was not so much. Our priorities were different, as were our stances on many issues, but there was a deep, deep bond. We were there for each other for all of life's big moments, and we enjoyed each other's company in the commonplace, the everyday place as well. My husband and I passed many a lovely evening in the company of this friend and her husband for pizza and poker nights. I was very close with her mother, and she with mine. I'm the godmother of her daughter, to whom I have always been very close. Unfortunately, over the span of the last several years, an ethical issue repeatedly sprung up over which we vehemently disagreed. And the same situation arose 3 different times, each time leading to a rift that lasted for a few years. Things were said that shocked and shook me. And after the second such incident, I told my friend that I couldn't and wouldn't take what I considered to be the emotional abuse that I had undergone in these circumstances, and that if it happened a third time, it really could do in our friendship. I told her my truth, that I was afraid of the power she had to hurt me. On each occasion, I was honest and told her I had not changed my position on the subject which divided us, and given the same circumstances again, I would not waver. And when the third occasion did arise, more horrific things were said, and I went to her home one day out of respect to our friendship to do in person what I needed to do. I told her I treasured our friendship but would not condescend to her or betray myself by acquiescing to her evaluation of me or her treatment of me. I told her that although I would always love her, I was unwilling now to share in each other's lives, to be active friends. That was about 5 years ago now, and I am still plagued with what I consider to be the tragedy of a lost friendship. I am someone who nurtures my friendships, and it is against my grain to end one, but I had to. I had to, as they say so wisely in 12-step programs, let go and let God. However, letting go is not my strong suit, and I struggle. I keep asking myself if I should just have turned the other cheek again. And I decided to look into that directive from Jesus, to examine what he said, what he meant, and what he did, and then discern with an open mind and heart what to do or not to do. So our reading today from Matthew begins with Jesus saying, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And Jesus is referring here to the age-old instruction we heard in Exodus. Yeah, if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So that's what Jesus is referring to, and that had come to him through the ages. So peeling back that onion to discover how the eye for an eye law came to be in the first place, I discovered that the principle is found first in Babylonian law. If a person had been hurt, then the injured person or their relative would take revenge on the person who had caused that injury, often, and this is what human beings are like, often avenging those wrongs totally out of proportion to the offense in the first place, even to the point of death. So the revenge was far, far worse than the insult sometimes. And the eye for an eye law was put in to stop that kind of escalation of the injury. It restricts the retribution to be no worse than the crime was in the first place. And now this is often referred to as the principle of reciprocal justice. Also, even Stephen, I jest. However, as with the telephone game, you know that old telephone game where a sentence is whispered into the ear of one person and then passed and whispered down to the end of the line, and by the time it comes out at the end of the line, it's completely distorted, not what it started off as being at all. And that's what it was for the eye for an eye law. It just got distorted over time. Metaphor turned literal. It was in response to this that Jesus said, as we heard in our reading today, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." But then he says, "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Author Roy H. Williams points out in his examination of turning the other cheek, if you meet evil with evil and blow for blow, the cycle of vengeance will never end. It's what I was saying to the kids. Gandhi said, I love this one, Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Whether we mean physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual violence makes no difference. Violence is violence. And we are certainly not strangers to it in our world today. Nor are we unfamiliar with disproportionate justice or revenge. If you remember, American basketball star Brittany Griner spent nearly 10 months in a Russian prison cell in supposed retribution for carrying hash oil, which is indeed against Russian law. But of course, the real story is about the U.S. support of Ukraine against Russia's aggression. Retribution completely out of proportion to the crime. So peel that onion again, and you find that the hostility toward Ukraine is claimed by Russia to be an action to protect their country from the inherent threat of their neighboring country, Ukraine, joining NATO. Revenge for even the possibility of that is the murder of innocent men, women, and children, and the decimation of much of that country. Completely disproportionate revenge for a non-crime that was never committed. In Canada and the US, we are opening our eyes to institutional brutality that hides minor offenses, but it's based on bigotry. Retribution disproportionate to the crime, and in some cases, retribution for what you look like. We are plagued by the downside of our humanness. Our instinct to pay back, to strike out. We're plagued further by self-deception in rationalizing our actions. And facing the same issues in his time, Jesus gives us guidance. So there's a danger in taking only literally Jesus' charge to turn the other cheek. If following that leads to helpless pacifism, we've taken it totally the wrong way. Jesus does not advocate pursuing justice or abandoning it. He offers us, though, an option of how to do it. So Jesus says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. A minister and professor by the name of Walter Wink took a really deep dive exploring the history and the meaning of that phrase. And from his work, I learned that in that time, when the Jews were under the occupying Romans law, the left hand was considered unclean. And if you touched someone with it, both of you were then branded unclean. So to slap someone, actually, this is where I'm going to use your body. Here, just want to demonstrate, because it took me a while to figure it out. So, okay, so belly standing, no, face me. Okay, so the idea then, I can't touch you with my left hand. Not that I care about you, I really do, but pretend I don't. But I will be unclean too if I touch you or slap you with my left hand, right? On the right cheek is what Jesus is saying. So to slap someone over here on Belly's right cheek, you had no option then. You had to use your right hand or you'd be unclean. So to slap him there meant with this hand means you have to do a backhand slap. So slap him just like that. But by the standards of that time, this backhand slap was one of rebuke that you would only give to someone underneath you, to a social inferior. It was a reprimand, master to slave, Roman to Jew. Now, if someone struck you that way, and say if Belly turned his cheek, if he turned the other cheek, so then I have no choice now but to slap him on his left cheek, well, that means that I'm forced then to use my right hand and to give him an open-handed slap on that other cheek. And that meant something completely different. That meant in those times that this is the slap that was saved for an equal, somebody who was equal to you in that position. So essentially, you are forcing them then, by having turned that cheek, to acknowledge the imbalance, the injustice, and you are daring them to grant you equality. Is you giving them that slap, and that's what that slap means. It is not violence, it's peaceful, but it is resistance. It's a dare. Rather than being told not to resist, the people gathered to hear Jesus are told not to resist violently. Thank you. The greater point was that Jesus was promoting a radical shift, a practical application of a spiritual ideal. And he integrated his devotion to peace into a challenge to the cruelty of the status quo. What one might mistake as weakness in non-retaliation was in fact strength of a far higher order. There was nothing weak about Jesus' directive to turn the other cheek. It was powerful and it was smart. Matt Lynch writes that Jesus wasn't interested in demolishing, this is a quote, demolishing the foundations of justice. Jesus still called for justice from the religious leaders of his day. He demanded it of others on behalf of others, especially the poor, the orphaned, and the widowed, end quote. But while Jesus strongly withstood any hostility directed against others, he did not resist any aggression directed toward himself. He set a standard of grace and of devotion to an ideal by turning the other cheek to his accusers in the form of silence or plain truth when they questioned him. And ultimately, Jesus displayed spiritual strength by acquiescing to a death on the cross, rising above his humanity to meet and merge with his higher self, with his Creator, as opposed to what many at that time would have thought. That wasn't humiliation. It was humility that ruled that day. Mercifully, modern society has benefited from the humility and grace of people inspired by the philosophy of turning the other cheek. Martin Luther King Jr. manifested it in his nonviolent protests. Instead of fighting back, he simply stood his ground in brave acts of defiance. Lynch further writes this, quote, "Similarly, Nelson Mandela knew how the principle worked. Mandela did not submit to an existence of inhumane treatment. He stood up. He raised his voice. He demonstrated the inhumanity of the aggressors. An entire country is different because he did." End quote. Gandhi's influence and that of many other brave spirits have kept lit the flame of peaceful resistance in our world. But the battle, it continues, the battle regarding aggression and revenge. And that battle is also reflected in our individual lives as well. While swift and violent revenge on any level may feel really good in the moment and give release to the anger of righteous indignation, a more peaceful but equally powerful reaction will win us the freedom of a conscience that bears no guilt at perpetuating violence, the satisfaction of not being under the thumb of our more hostile tendencies. And with any luck, that will shift the dynamic then between our aggressors and ourselves. Michael Atkinson makes a distinction that I find very valuable. He says this, quote, "Love is the goal, even toward enemies, but loving our enemies and defending ourselves from legitimate harm are not at odds." End quote. That's something I can really hold on to when thinking about the rift with my friend that plagues me. I think we have to look to intention. My closing that door on that friendship, truthfully, was not revenge. It was self-preservation. I wish only the best for her. I go back to that wisdom of let go and let God, and I place her in God's hands, and I pray for her. But that relationship was toxic. It has caused me pain, emotionally and spiritually. I miss it, and I miss her. I miss all the lovely parts of our friendship, but every time I think, oh, I'll open the door again, something in me shrinks back in fear. When bedeviled with second guessing, I remind myself that when you physically turn the other cheek, you look in a different direction. And that's an image that I can hang on to. Looking in the other direction is an image I can use. Look to something brighter. Do something positive. Have faith that the Holy Spirit has moved you in the right direction. It's confusing, but I'm trying. We are all trying. Amen.